Plutara's Day. The guardian of the aged and the elderly. The preserving goddess. She who watches over lost things.
Professor Jimenez?
Jama looked up at the query from his antechamber. He always kept his door open. After all, beyond that was only the gallery, and outside of class hours it was usually deserted. No one wanted to see the collections of dead worlds that littered the stars. While visitors sometimes came to look at the holograph of the Ujaran, they seldom stayed. It was depressing, which it bloody well ought to be. The endless cabinets contained artifacts from countless worlds, endless dead species. Preventing that march of desolation was a policy the Imperium had implemented, wherever possible, and through sheer force when needs be. There would be no more Urjars. The tomb world that was Shul's nearest neighbour had made its mark on the Shivanti psyche. Visitors who came to see their exhibit tended to feel proud of the fact, though they buggered off soon enough too. It took a rare form of stupidity to feel self-congratulatory in a mausoleum. Jama settled his tea on his plate and paused to study the pair of girls framed in his doorway. Even in the dimmer light he preferred, he recognized them both.
Miss Sandoka. Miss Palavon. Please come in. I've just made tea. Will you nay be dears and fetch yourself cups? They're just on the sideboard.
He offered them a smile, waving to the chairs opposite his own.
I dinna get many visitors, so what brings you both?
We came to ask how the wedding preparations were going, Bolondi asked. I know they're trying to keep things under control, but Professor Warwick doesn't seem interested in the details. They want to keep it small, but I appreciate you working in my guest.
I've known Mavere a long time, Jama said, sipping his tea and regarding them both. I'll make sure things are taken care of, one way or the other. Mavere said they were trying to keep it down, but I don't think it's working out. It's best to plan for more with weddings, you can?
Jama watched the girls glance at each other. Tom's lass had yet to say a word. The silence stretched.
Is there anything else, ladies?
You're his friend,
Deshin said flatly. Aye, I am. Though the way you say it sounds more an accusation than a question.
Jama set down his tea. Well, and there it was. At least the girl was being uncommonly direct. That was something of a relief after all this time.
So, is there something else? Or should I ask if there is something else, Your Royal Highness? Forgive me if I dinna stand up in my own chambers, but you'll reach a certain age where you just want to get to the damned point.
You know who I am, sir, Bolondi said.
There was no hesitation then. Well, and she was Kalira. Diffidence didn't go with the role of Imperial Noble, though he was gratified to see that manners still could.
Aye, though I had nae expected you to say so something must be fashing you. So tell me.
Jama picked up his tea again. Apparently it was going to be a conversation after all.
As Tom says, you're closest sisters. I expect that means you know as well, Miss Deshin. So, you have something on your minds. And you came to say your piece?
I wouldn't have put it quite that way, sir.
Kalira folded her hands behind her back, but her look never faltered, which was hardly unexpected. The lass would be well schooled in keeping her own counsel, though she appeared to have brought counsel along. Tom's girl was looking at him as keenly as the princess probably was, under the surface. One girl to beat the waters and the other to catch the fish, then.
And how would you put it, Miss Deshin?
Jama examined his tea for a long moment. It was rude to look away, considering Kalira had identified herself as a princess of the realm. On the other hand, if they wanted to play, he could play right back. It would nae hurt to poke a bit and see what came of it.
You've nae said two words together, which seems unlikely for any girl of Miv and Tom.
The pair looked a good deal alike, and it seemed they were close enough as friends to ken what was on the other's mind. Deshin glanced at Kalira for a moment, though the princess only rolled her eyes a wee bit in return.
Sir.
Deshin seemed to take a moment, though only a moment.
I've seen your file. We know you were part of the committee that opted to invade Earth. I'm sorry, sir. I love having a family and a father, but I hope you understand if I feel just a little conflicted about it.
Aye. Just as much as I am.
Jama set his cup down, then dusted his trousers off and rose, as was only proper. Having invaded his chambers, the girls were now guests.
So, you're now Deshin Pelavon, or is it Warwick Pelavon? And what would you really wish me to say about Tom Warwick, or about humanity? I, and the others I worked with, were tasked with saving the humans, even from themselves. So place yourself in my shoes for just one moment, if you will, and tell me what you'd do. And, as I fill my ears, I'd appreciate it if you'd sit, so an old man can sit as well.
The girls did, so he did as well.
You were saying?
I'd have tried to help.
Deshin tried to sound firm, but as to that? Well, sod that.
To help.
Jama nodded indulgently, letting a trace of sarcasm into his voice.
To help what, exactly, Miss Pelavon?
To help humanity be better,
she said defensively.
Aye, and there it was. The girls had brought the Deep-Minder to his door, but didn't seem to know what to do with it. Best to get the matter out into the open. Time and time, then. Time to let all the poisons that lurk beneath the mud hatch out.
Aye? Well, but better is subject to interpretation. What is better to one sentient is worse to another. Better is woolly thinking, young lady. If you want to make a wish, make it something definite.
Right now, I definitely wish you were less of a cock,
Deshin glowered. Jama nearly burst out laughing, but he glowered harder instead.
Ah, well, that's definite. I am so very sorry that you feel I am an inadequate friend to your parents,
Jama said contritely, glaring at her under his bushy brows. It was a good glare.
I will endeavour to do better in the future.
Really?
Deshin's tone was guarded. She wasn't buying it, and well she shouldn't. For all Miver's graces and warm heart, she had a good detector for Turok shit. Thankfully, her adopted daughter seemed to have the same.
No, you little bitch, I will not. I am bound to secrecy under Imperial law, and how I feel doesn't count for shite, he growled out.
Aye, Kalira was a princess, but for a moment he allowed himself to be what he was, a Cambrian. Jama looked at the girl's stunned expressions and nodded once before mollifying his tone.
I do the best I'm able, and I am the best friend to your father I can be. So if you are allowed to be vague, then I am allowed to interpret. Life isn't about what we wish it to be. It's about taking what is, then working to make it what we want.
Jama glowed, setting down his tea.
So what do you want to talk about, if we're done with wishful thinking?
That wasn't polite, the princess said, her tone firm rather than sharp. Aye, and there she was, still ready to catch what came in her net. Our other professors would never speak to students that way.
True enough, your highness, Jama nodded, conceding the point. But are you here to speak with a professor of dead worlds, or a man tasked with assessing humanity? Aye, I was one of the panelists regarding the occupation of Earth. People with my expertise are fairly scarce, you ken. We were faced with the deaths of tens of thousands, or billions.
Jama drew a deep breath and turned on Deshin.
So, you've seen the files? Have you reviewed the data on Earth? The projections, if we didn't intervene?
No. There are thousands. It's too much information.
Deshin folded her hands in her lap and shook her head.
We have a friend. Her mother was a Commander Trolanji. She killed herself and it was covered up. We wanted to know why.
She's covering for me, Professor.
Princess Kalira lifted her chin and canted her head ever so slightly.
I went looking for information on Earth about what went wrong. I wanted to understand what happened to Professor Warwick. I've grown up knowing all the pieces, but I spent a lot of time the last few months fitting them together. Once we had the files, we found out about our friend. It seems like the more we look, the more questions there are. You've never told him about your involvement, and time isn't a luxury I have right now. Sir, we were hoping you might be able to give us real answers.
I'm sorry about your friend's mother. That happened, and more often than you might expect. I didn't know her, but part of every plan is going through the analysis after, and I can tell you both it happened.
Jama sniffed once, poring through the memory of the years.
If it's the context you're wanting, I suppose you can look at this. It will near give you peace, but it's as much of an answer as I have to give.
Leaning forward, he picked up his omnipad and opened a file on the wall of his study.
I'd worry about revealing classified documents, but in present company, I didn't think that's an issue. That is a succinct presentation of our findings, as you'll find. Our most accurate projections for Earth if we decided not to intervene.
But we could have come to them peacefully. Talk to them, Deshin said, as she looked at the screen. That's not wishful thinking.
The file first, in its entirety, if you please. If you think these projections are depressing, you didn't want to see the ones for us talking.
Jama shook his head.
A fractured species with no central government, more than a small talent for war, gaining use of advanced technology, no compulsion to join the Imperium, and all of them racing for a weapon to settle their scores. As bad as this is, the results for talking to them would have been far worse.
Jama watched the pair as he swiped slowly through the introductory slides, covering demographics and planetary evaluations. After the first dozen of those, the presentation got down to the point.
By the tipping point, pollutants had expanded exponentially across Earth's planetary biosphere. 40 years before our arrival, humanity's population had already exceeded the carrying capacity for their environment, with resources being depleted faster than the planet could replace them. Aye, the curve was slow, but it was steady, and the arc was exponential. The combination of carbon emissions and global deforestation on Earth were driving climate change, which was already driving a loss of productive agriculture, leading to conflicts, with starving populations across fragile portions of the planet. But the trigger for the invasion of Earth had been Brexit? Aye, that's what human media was calling it. Their so-called United Kingdom's two snap elections just before our arrival. The movement to break away from the central government of the European continent was indicative. It wasn't the only factor, but that was a definitive tipping point.
Jama nodded, taking control of the presentation again.
The data was up on the screen, but he knew the data by heart. The European continental government would near have fallen. There was even a 73% chance it would come out more unified without the disruptive influences, despite a 14% chance of one of the smaller nation-states also leaving. The real problem was the economic downturn.
One slide led to the next.
Coupled with rising risks of regional military action, divorcing a major military power from the rest of the continent at a critical time.
Another slide.
There were trouble points on the continent. We called them vectors. 2 were military and a third was economic, and that was just one area.
I am familiar with the area. It was in our history simulation, Kalira said quietly.
Well, there were over a dozen major vectors across the planet. Aye, and a bushel of minor ones too. The main problem for the European continent was the 66% chance that the kingdom became a less reliable partner in the event of a military event, requiring a unified response to control. People who are so ready to pull the blanket over their heads once are nay so willing to come out, you can. And there were plenty to choose from.
Jama flipped through the chart showing projections for wars of aggression from either Eastern Europe or escalating around the Middle Eastern sea zone, strangling transportation and supplies. At the time of our arrival, there were already 7 million transient humans from conflict in the Middle Eastern area alone. Humans? They had an expression I find perpetually aggravating, Jama said. It is what it is, which is as comforting an excuse for doing nothing as you like to hear, you ken. The ones not actively denying the problems were convincing themselves there was nothing they could do about them. Goddess! They even had significant portions of the population willing to believe that when the end came, supernatural beings would lift them all into the sky. And if that didn't happen, well, do you know the main problem with belief?
We believe in the divine, Clara frowned, though both she and Deshin were still studying the information intently. That's not just a human thing.
No, I ken it's not, and it can be a great source of strength in time of need, when looked at properly. Shilvati? When we come to our end, we are weighed in the balance. We go into Shil's embrace, or we sink into the deeps based on our actions, and that's the end of it. But humans? Say you repent to the end, and you'd go to your reward. Jama huffed in exasperation. The presentation would get to cultural outlooks later. All of which is very comforting, but if that kind of belief permeates a culture, it means consequences are now your problem. Something for the next generation to handle. It's, what can anyone do about it? Instead of, what can I do? Or better yet, what I bloody well am going to do. That sort of thinking becomes the norm, even in the mental backdrop. And a civilization is properly buggered.
Was it that encompassing a belief? Kalira asked thoughtfully, even as Deshin scowled. Professor Warwick has presented a great diversity of cultures across Earth.
It's a good question, but you're skipping ahead. Jama pushed to the next graph, showing projections for a war in Asia, around an exchange between the major superpower and its island rival. It took them a moment to run down the numbers. The lass had gone a bit pale, but had now looked away.
Well and good. Here are minds waiting to be fed. 'Tis a shame to fill them with gall. Welcome to my world, girls.
The structure you're looking at is the Three Gorges Dam, and it was a primary target for any exchange between the People's Republic of China and any of the dozen-odd nations that were busy pissing off. Jama nodded curtly as the video played out. Puncture the dam, and all that water would have flooded major population centers, and no way to stop it. 400 million dead from the initial strike, another 250 dying from the immediate after effects, and another 100 to 250 million either dead from tertiary conditions or rendered migratory. That's nearly 10% of the population dead in 4 local months, Deshin exclaimed. War notwithstanding, the effect overwhelms the central government, which responds with even more violence with a non-trivial death toll of its own. Jama flipped to another slide. With a 92% chance of massive internal turmoil and population displacement that then contributes to the global migratory population. What's left of the government there encourages their exodus, rather than trying to meet the problem. There's another case for war on the Korean Peninsula. And another over an escalating war over a petroleum field in disputed waters. The reoccurring feature of the Asian scenarios is that the dam strike would kill over 11% of humanity while unraveling critical supply chains. Slide followed slide, each detailing conflicts across Asia. For the last several decades, key nation-states divested their industries into partner nations in Asia to make use of inexpensive labor, while co-opting those countries economically. When those supply chains are catastrophically cut, it begins a cascading economic collapse. Deshin shook her head. But unified supply chains and responses are good. Aye, when fully applied. But when half a population wants to pretend the rest of the universe doesn't exist, it acts like a seismic collision. Jama claps his hands together and squeezed dramatically. Like tectonic movement, you can. Near committed to one or the other, the result are fractures that break it all to pieces. Ecological change was driving ever larger migrant populations, Projections showed a 43% chance of a major nuclear exchange and a 71% chance of a minor one, but the real problem would have been a continued reliance on fossil fuels. Rather than stopping the main vector driving their ecological collapse, the survivors would now have had the resources to convert to alternative energy. Deeps! They even had people denying it was a cause.
The information was depressing. Shocking. And yet he's seen it in the histories of how many dead worlds before the Imperium? Countless graveyards strewn across the galaxy. Or worse, death worlds where the local species barely clung to life. It wasn't just a human story. It was the story of what always happened when a species walked herself blindly into a technological trap. Large migrant populations, combined with agricultural collapse, drive starvation. Millions of beings unable to feed themselves, either because the terrain no longer supports agriculture, or because they are displaced. And that's where disease vectors start to really kick in.
You mean, like the Spanish flu? Desi broke in. We just started reading about that one before the holiday.
On any world with a true planetary transit system, large populations reduce as squalor become a vector for global pandemics that spread through fast transit. Medical systems break down under pressure. The next graph showed the projections for a pandemic outbreak. There was not just one, but dozens. Disease doesn't care about closed borders or ideologies. Sooner or later, life finds a way. And that's typically the last chance for a world. A species either decides they'll work together, or they decide to build walls and pretend it's nay their problem. The girls already looked stricken. He's seen the expression before. It happened when the audience was most of the way through the data. A visceral understanding that a collapse was unfolding. An accelerating tidal wave of misery and death. There was no point in driving the data into the deeps. The destruction never comes from any one event. As for humanity, by the end of the next 50 years, extinction in several key species causes an ecological collapse. The result peaks around 79% death toll for humanity, though there was a non-trivial chance of total human extinction.
But that still seems impossible.
Kalira frowned at the screen.
Earth had a basic technological civilization before we arrived. I understand the numbers, but how could it be that bad?
Aye, and I've seen it time and again when a race puts more of their work into growth than resilience. It's a technology trap, lass.
Jama crossed his arms and waited till he had their attention.
For the next few minutes, pretend you're my students, eh? Well, I'd like you to take a moment and look around the room you're in, if you please. Cambria and Sevastopol were isolated for a time during the war. There's something about living with the resources of just one world that most people can now understand. So imagine everything around you. This room, the building, the academy, the city just beyond. Imagine you're limited to the infrastructure and resources of just one planet.
Jama waited as the girls looked around them. It was a comfortable room, and over the years he'd filled it with his collections, imbued it with his personality.
It's about the things that surround you, the things in any technical civilization. By their very presence, they're in the background. They shape the way you think, you can. You take them for granted, until you can't. You go through your day with nary a thought about how they're there, who's responsible for making them, or why they're even there to begin with. Just for the sake of it, let's say you live in one of the buildings out in the capital. It's winter outside, and there it sits, wrapping you in a blanket of technology to keep you fed, safe, and out of the cold. That's where it starts, as technology progressively infiltrates into daily life.
Jama shut down the presentation and poured himself a fresh cup of tea.
Technology becomes a life support system you cannot survive without. And yet, how much of it does anyone understand? Now, empty your pockets on the table, girls.
The looks were less wary, unsuspecting. They always were, and Jama saw the usual pile girls carried. 2 omnipads. There were always the omnipads.
Let's say you live somewhere on, the 36th floor. Do you bother yourself when you step into an elevator to go home, or to work? Of course you don't. And as technology increases, the things you take for granted multiply exponentially. Once an industrial age moves into a technology age, the inventions you have become a vast interdependent network no one being can understand in a lifetime. It's everything from how your omnipad works to keeping the heat on.
Or air traffic control, Deshin muttered.
It's like the ripples rising and falling on a pond, and so complex that only those as specialised in them understand how their own ripple works. But change even one, and you've changed them all. I don't mean use things. Use is nay the same thing as understanding, but we use things as if we understand them. You try and make those omnipads, or the network that supports them.
Jama pulling up a picture of the capital on the monitor.
You take any city on any world, once the species hits the technology age, and it becomes a desert island. It cannot do a thing to keep its inhabitants alive without supplies from outside. Without those supplies, the people in that city will die, yet everyone acts as if they need death traps, because there's really no other choice. So there you are in the lift, a tiny enclosed steel box, going up to the apartment on the 36th floor, when any one of a million ripples stops. You're trapped in the dark. So, what do you do, Miss Deshin?
I suppose I'd wait a while. My omnipad has a charge, so I have a light. I call emergency services.
Aye? Jama raised his eyebrows, looking at them expectantly. So, there you are, waiting for technology to save your life, because you canna ken that it won't. And when it does nae, you're done. And if you admit that, then you'd have to admit every single day after day, in one form or another, you're walking into a technology trap, because that's the only way to live in a technological age. But what happens when you're on one planet, one infrastructure, one city, when the effects are widespread? When the breakdown is irreversible, you can. So there you are in a metal box with an omnipad, no food, no water, and that's all.
Well, if I couldn't wait, there should be an escape panel into the transit shaft.
Deshin frowned thoughtfully, glazing over at Kalira.
It would be hard for me to get out, right now, but I'd manage, I think.
We'd manage together,
Kalira said firmly. Aye, so two young women together. Fair enough. Let's say you climb to the nearest floor. Can you find some stairs? Will your keycard, with its unpowered lock, let you back in your unpowered apartment? And then what? Because in every scenario, a technological-based civilization without power eats itself. And rapidly, too. You have the battery in your omnipad. What you can find, and that's all. And if the communication servers are buggered or overloaded, any chance of an organized response is gone. It's everyone for themselves, and supplies will run out, fast. Jama looked at the pair and pressed ahead, not giving them a moment. You're in a crisis, girls, and sooner or later you have no choice but to leave or die. What then, Miss Kalira?
All right.
Kalira stared at her tea thoughtfully before looking at him with determination.
So we need to get away from the danger, which means a vehicle, but not an autocab because those probably won't work. I expect there'd be people everywhere. We'd have to grab the first one we could find.
Aye, and if you didn't get one, what then?
We'd walk. That's all we could do.
You want to live, so you start walking. Jama pursed his lips and nodded once. Well, the minute you decide to move, you're on your own again, and that's when the traps start to close. Do you know where to go? With no GPS, do you have an actual printed map? Do you know where to even go in order to survive? Are you ahead of the hundreds of thousands or millions of others around you, all making the same choice? If they catch up with you, have you got something they need? And if you have, can you protect it? Do you have the food and water to last till you get away? And if not, where will the two of you get it?
We steal it. There will be shops to loot, for a while.
Deshin said pensively, before glancing over at Kalira.
That's just the situation. We'd have to scavenge whatever we could find.
Well now, then, do you have enough to get away? Can you be certain just how far away that is, to be safe? Do you even know what a safe place looks like, without technology?
Belder would know. We'd have to find a food source, shelter. The beaches. We couldn't go fishing on the beaches, not with all those people.
Deshin looked at Kalira, who bit her lower lip, but nodded.
So, a farm. So we're on one planet, but even on Shield there are still farms and ranches. They might not be close, but they'd be there.
Her expression became a little haunted, as well it should. Jama had to wonder how far the pair would go, and how fast, with Deshin's infirmity. It was an unkind thought, and he set it aside.
Let's say you have enough luck to make it far out into the country, to a place as looks right to you. A farm, aye, as that's where you get food. So, days later, you find a farm and you decide to stop.
Jama sniffed dismissively, then leaned forward with a long and hungry look.
And has anyone gotten there first? Or are the women as own it still there? Because you need food and shelter, and they're nae likely to just give that up, considering. So, exhausted and desperate, and with nowhere to loot, you have a choice to make, don't you? Do you ken what that choice is, Miss Deshin?
We either have to fight, or we have to give up, Deshin said darkly. And if we give up, we die.
Aye. So you die, or you're no at the place of making someone else die, because they will nae give you the things you'll need to live. And what has it gotten the two of you ready for that choice? Because that's exactly where you are.
I can fight, Deshin said firmly. Kalira is pretty good with a knife too.
Aye. Well, I dinna think I'll ask.
Jama raised an eyebrow at Deshin's admission. It was nae the kind of thing a lady admitted with such conviction, but he decided to take it at face value.
Let's say that by some chance, the owners are gone and the place is yours. Is there food in the house? How long will you last then?
It's your scenario, Deshin said, with a wee trace of resentment in her voice. She's right, Professor. It's either there or it isn't, Kalira added.
Fair and fair. So let's say there's food. How will you cook it, if there's no power? Wood fires? Do you have an actual axe to chop the wood? It's a farm, so let's say there is, and I'll even give you livestock.
Jama said, magnanimously.
You have the planet's equivalent of a Taurox, but do your city girls know how to slaughter, butcher and dress an animal? And if you do that, even badly, you have enough meat to eat, until you've eaten all the Taurox.
But we're on a farm, not a ranch, Deshin broke in. There will be crops, sir.
Oh, aye, but it's nae a primitive farm, is it? It's a technological farm, where every single drone and machine demands the one thing you dinna have. Power. Congratulations. You made it to a farm where nae a single thing works, Jama said. Or if it's a world like Earth, do you have the chemical fuel to run the equipment? How long will it last if you do? Because you canna get more. So what you need is a draft animal. And have you ever even seen one of those? By still another miracle, let's say there's a manual plough. Do you know how to hook it up? Do you know what kind of seeds to plant and when to plant them? Let's say, still, another damn miracle occurs, and you get out of the building, out of the city, away from the crowds, find a farm, no one's home, it has what you need, and after a while you can how to hook up the plough, plant a field, and when you harvest... Then, and only then, have you escaped the wreckage of a technological world and survived. And do you ken just what percentage of technological city beings would be as lucky?
Jama looked at the pair, as the odds against survival fully sank in.
And now you have the idea. It takes ages for a species to reach an age of technology, but if they dinna put real effort into resilience, it's only days for it all to fly apart. When it comes down to it, lasses, one central authority works, provided it's got the vision to do what's right. Humanity dinna have it, and our projections showed they were well and properly buggered if we dinna step in. And in fairness, Princess, the Imperium wanted that world. A full population, adapted to technology. It was a treasure trove.
Jama drew a long breath.
Our team could nae have held them back if we tried.
Do you think it would do humanity good to know what they were facing? Kalira asked thoughtfully. Wouldn't it help New Worlds to accept the Imperium? I know we don't do something for nothing, but if it's that or extinction...
Your father's a proud man. Do you think he would have wanted to know? I'd have grieved far more if he were dead. Would you rather we waited and you met his daughter, half dead of disease, or his grandchild starving in a hovel? I can change the bad things that have happened to him, and I wouldn't if I could," Jama said quietly.
How often had he looked at the data on Earth? How certain had the projections been? Too certain. Too sure. What I could do, and did do, was report on what we could have done better. But some secrets need to be kept. I'll thank you both to keep mine. Couldn't they have beaten the odds? Deshin asked fretfully. Humanity is so different from all the other races we've met. Couldn't it have been different?
Aye, they're different. In some ways.
But alike in so many others. That's what lets you relate to your father as you do.
And I'm sorry, lass, but they were not different in this, Jama said. I have seen worlds that went this path, and for all their many differences, in this they were just the same.
So all those dead worlds out in your gallery? Kalira asked. That's how the story goes?
Every world reaches a choice.
Jama looked down, finding renewed interest in his tea. Humanity had reached its choice.
And that's how the bloody story goes.
With a day left before the wedding, Zenshiki knew she was out of time. She'd been more than reasonable about waiting for Sunchaser to look at her courtship gift, and whatever else the Pathfinder might want would wait. She had a boy to court, a wedding to attend, and Solana Dasari to deal with. All of which proved one thing. You could never have enough knives. That said, her pelt bristled at the old Pathfinder's reluctance.
It's just, I don't think you know quite what you've actually got here, Sunchaser grumbled, as she took the set out from her safe. It's not the sentiment, it's the value, girl. You could buy our family ship with these. Deeps, back on Pesh, properly marketed, you could buy 10 of these Old Alliance rust buckets.
Zenshiki scored her features and stilled her Asaic. Still, there was a matter of pride.
I was born on this ship. It is our home. Yes, well, sentimentality plus an empty sack is worth the empty sack, kid. The Alliance got really pissy after our people figured out they weren't gods. We ate a few of them, but those bitches had no sense of proportion.
Sunchaser crossed her arms and huffed.
Sure, they stayed to do business, more or less, but they still pushed off their old crap on us.
As a kid, she would have hissed in dismay. Having seen the ships constantly moving to and from orbit around the shore homeworld, she did not dignify that with an answer, though at least their home was not purple.
Are you and the bandmothers refusing to give them back? Pah! Cracks and shards I probably should, just to save us all the drama. You really are your mother's daughter, and sometimes that makes you a real pain in the tail.
Sunchaser's Asaic flashed once, a revealing loss of Tawah that a Pathfinder would only allow with other family members.
Fine, take 'em, but don't say I didn't tell you so.
Zenshiki took her time, sliding the knife and fork from the table with exquisite lassitude, every inch of her Asaic saying, "Mine." It wasn't as if Sunchaser had laid claim to them, but they were her treasure. Perhaps they could buy a new ship. That would be something Past could consider, once she secured his betrothal. Ships were common. Here on Shill, Pezran boys were rare. And the chance to humiliate her elder sister? That was priceless.
I don't understand. Why didn't you claim them for the family?
After coming out of hiding in the back room, Sunchaser looked at Zenshiki's younger sister. Raikishi was a good kid, with a lot of talent, and one day, sooner than she wanted to think about, she'd take over as Pathfinder. But not today.
Raikish, you're going to have to learn how your family works. Part of our work is dealing with other warbands, but most of it is sitting here, listening to people, listening to their problems, and giving advice, she said sagely. That's what lets a band survive, crammed in together like this. I appreciate that part.
Her apprentice stilled her Asaic artfully.
I still can't think of a reason to let her go through with this, other than just, well, Maybe you're just bored. Ha! With all this shit? Dark mother, I couldn't be bored in this family if I tried, Sunchaser chortled. Besides, I love crashing weddings. I suppose. So, that means we're going too?
Rikishi flipping her aside in second-degree acknowledgement, while arching into a third-degree query.
Of course we are. I wouldn't miss this for anything, she nodded. Besides, a wedding means free eats. That's true.
Rikishi bounced on her toes happily. The kid really was a rubber ball, ready to bounce back from anything.
It's just, after Senshiki gives him those, and Pethiri gives him her gift, what do I get for past? Well, fuck.
The speech was unconventional, but with a few tweaks it seemed right. More importantly, Kalira embraced it with real conviction. It wasn't just something to be said, it was something she needed to say. Something she needed to give voice to, not just for herself, but for all the Imperium. She took to it with a passion, and learned it by heart after 2 hours. After that, it was just a case of polish, and Desi listened to each delivery before they picked over what worked and what didn't. It wasn't what the speech said, so much as what people would hear. That said, by noon, they took a break. They were both tired, and she needed to make a call. She set the on-the-pad down on the table between herself and Melondi. Sitting across the table, her friend, the princess, was rubbing her forehead. Kalira peeked over, canting her head as the call connected. "Hey, Desi." Her father came over the line clearly, while other voices filled the background with a susurrus of noise. "What's up?"
Nothing but the sky,
Desi grinned. It was a human thing. Nonsensical in itself, but her father liked the expression for some reason. "That's my girl. So how are you two doing?"
We're taking a break.
Desi looked over at Mel, who shook her head. There were times when Mel's double life seemed incomprehensible, like she never knew who she could care for or trust. Given the double life she'd lived, just to get into the academy, Desi found it a bitter irony for her friend.
Father, I was wondering, did you ever live through a power outage on Earth?
Me? Sure, a few times. I think the worst was 4 days. Desi looked up at Melondi, who'd opened her eyes in shock.
I'm sorry, Father, did you say 4 days?
Mm-hmm. It was the dead of winter about 3 years before the landing, and a storm took down the power and phone lines. I lived out on a spur from the mains and spent 4 days without heat and power, and 2 weeks before the phone company got our data net back. Tom's voice was thoughtful, then he chuckled. My wife and I pulled an air mattress into the smallest room we could find, then huddled onto a pile of blankets for heat. It really kind of sucked. Why'd you ask?
It's something we read. Was that kind of thing common on Earth?
Often enough. There were big outages in Texas and another in Puerto Rico just around the time the Imperium showed up, though the worst part there was the hospitals and just getting clean water. Tom paused as some holiday revelers shouted in the background. Now you mention it, that was one of the first things the Imperial engineers scrambled to fix.
Okay. We really need to get back to work. I'll see you tonight, Father.
Desi stared at the on-the-pad, trying to imagine her father's face as she closed out the call and said her goodbyes.
I suppose it's just hard to believe.
Desi looked up at Melondi helplessly. It had all been true. Every awful word. Which made what they were doing vitally important.
The first step in solving a problem is recognizing there is one.